Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of our InspirAsians campaign. Joy Pasamonte Henry describes herself as a working mother, full-time social activist, and community volunteer. Happy AAPI Heritage Month, and we are so delighted to have you today, Joy.
Thanks for having me, Lillian. I appreciate it. I'm honored.
Thank you so much. And we'll delve a little bit more into Joy's relationship also with the Millbrae Anti-Racist Coalition, which is the group that is really sponsoring this and helping create this project. So let's start off with a little bit about your identity and culture, Joy. So from talking to you, I know that you have a very interesting background and backstory, as well as a very different point of view on culture and community, perhaps versus someone like me. And so as a very broad question, what does your identity as an API mean to you? And feel free to interpret that in any way.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's probably the broadest term of Asian, and not completely Asian American. I mean, I immigrated here when I was in my early 20s. My first language isn't English. My parents are of Filipino descent with Chinese and Spanish ancestry. However, I grew up in Japan and also Indonesia. So it's kind of a mix of, if you look at all of the Asian countries, I am kind of a mix of several different cultures in one, just because of my upbringing.
Yeah, I think that's obviously a very interesting background, backstory has shaped you as a person. And also, just to kind of list off what you were saying, you've been able to embrace sort of the culture from, Japanese to Indonesian, Chinese, Spanish, and Filipino, as well as while raising multiracial kids who identify as Asian, Mexican, and Black. Did you ever feel like you weren't Filipino enough or weren't Asian enough? And did you feel pressure to put yourself in a box, as sort of thinking when we're speaking of the broad term of API?
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, there are many instances when I didn't feel never not Asian enough, but probably not Filipino enough. Growing up, I didn't speak, well, my parents told me not to speak the language, so I just spoke straight English. Yeah, so I mean, I would say that, I didn't speak Filipino very well. And so I got made fun of a lot because of it. And I didn't know, I also went to university there and I didn't know enough of the culture. So that was always difficult for me, the culture and the history and the politics, and taking political science in a country where you don't know the history. I received a lot of backlash, but it forced me to learn more about a place. Just in terms of taking that adversity, it made me want to learn more about Filipino history. And then growing up in Japan, I wanted to learn more about Japanese culture, the food, the people, and same with Indonesia. So it just gets you in a place where you want to grow more instead of, insulating yourself.
As you were kind of discussing about your education, and also because some of the countries where you have lived in also have a deep-rooted history, sometimes with seeing the effects of colonization, and also histories of oppression and imbalance of power. As you were kind of talking about having this global perspective, how important do you think it is for us to, learn about the history of, either some of these countries or your ancestry in general, and what we can take away from that, even if you are an Asian American, living here and assimilating in the United States?
I think it's extremely important to understand. I tell my girls, you have to understand your personal history, like your family history, as well as where you come from, like where your people come from. It helps you understand your own struggles, right? I mean, and those are the things that I think a lot of us take for granted. And here in the United States, I learned a lot of history in the sense that colonizers were the heroes. And so I'm starting to learn myself. It's never too late to learn that that's not the true history, right? Asian Americans have a long colored history here in the United States. And I think we should take that opportunity to learn what that is, especially living here and wanting to make a difference. If we're going to make a difference, we have to know what the problems are, what the challenges are, and what we've done right so we can continue forward in a positive way.
Great, and we will also delve a little more into that messaging as we talk about some of your community service work and advocacy, which really I think speaks to what we were talking about in terms of educating and being able to embrace culture and identity as well. So as you're mentioning in sort of the timeline, you immigrated to the United States after doing your undergrad in the Philippines. And so what was the most shocking thing about coming to the United States, even though I know you growing up, you had kind of been exposed to English and maybe some other just stereotypical American things.
I mean, I think the big thing is that when you grow up in an international community, even if it's surrounded by, a lot of Americans, an international community is very different. I mean, people really don't, and I know that we're trying to see to appreciate everyone's color, but people just see each other for who they are. Whereas I think when I came to the United States, there was a division amongst even Asians, between Asians, East Asians, Pacific Islanders, and even amongst just the Filipino community are, Filipinos versus Filipino Americans. And that's not a distinction that I was aware of before. Granted, each country has their own, like there are classes, right? But it doesn't seem as apparent, or maybe I was blinded by it because of watching American television and thinking everyone lives together in harmony. That's not the case. And I learned that quickly.
Right. And I think a lot of the times with just Asian Americans in general, we grew up thinking that we are perpetually foreigners in a country where we're seen as different. And what was your experience as someone who kind of already, established a level of English where, you were able to converse and maybe people were surprised by, how well you spoke it versus maybe some of your other community members or neighbors who maybe didn't face the same treatment as you in terms of just the level of education they had in English, and maybe you could speak a little bit to your experience in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, just my parents. They have an accent. So when they speak English, they speak very fluent English. But you can see that there are differences in the way people are treated, just how they speak English. I mean, I've learned to, because I moved around every 4 or 5 years, I learned to assimilate, and I think a lot of Asians do that, right? We want to become a part of wherever we are, and moving here. I think one of the struggles is that I had that advantage over other people is that, you know, I already came with a US passport because of my father. And so other people in my situation coming from the Philippines directly, even though they had degrees, even though they had graduate degrees, they found that they had to work at Target, work 2 or 3 jobs in order to just make it. And those were things that were not ever apparent to me, and I've always taken, I used to take for granted. Whereas with myself, I knew that I had a career path, and these are the things that I wanted to do. But there are some people in the same situation, because they don't speak with my accent, or they don't know enough of the culture, that they can't get jobs as easily. I mean, I had to struggle as well, but I wouldn't say to the same extent as my counterparts coming in from China for the first time, or Indonesia or the Philippines. It's very, I think it's hard if you don't know the language, if you don't know the system.
For sure. And I know, a lot of just, my friends whose parents or grandparents have experienced that type of thing. And I think it's very powerful that people recognize privilege, even though I think it's a learning process in terms of reflecting on that. And so on that topic, on top of being, a mom to three daughters and having a day job, you're also, I would say, an integral part of the community. So, working with community service, social advocacy. So, what would you say inspired and motivated you to just jump in, moving into America, and then also having so many responsibilities on top of everything? What really inspired you to jump into this line of work?
Well, I think it's genetic. It's in my DNA. My dad was always volunteering for things within the community outside of his day job. He was actually, the reason he joined the U.S. military was it was martial law in the 1970s in the Philippines, and he wanted to be a lawyer, but there was just no opportunity for him, or not great opportunities. So he was an activist against the government. And so, again, it was just something that, you can always do something for your community. Even if it's small, my belief is that everyone does something positive, then we can change the things that we don't think are right. And, ever since I had my daughters, that was an important part of me raising them, is to show them that you can change the world that you live in. And it's not by complaining, it's not by writing letters, it's by actually doing the things that you think are, if you think something's wrong, do something about it.
Great, and I think that's what you've done, obviously. We'll talk about your first. Um, I don't know if this is your first role, but this is one of your prominent roles. While your daughters were at Mills High School, you were the president of the parent teaching organizing group. And so, what would you say is the significance of being able to impact decisions for funding and other, school related business, knowing that that will shape, a child's education?
Yeah, so I've always volunteered since my youngest, sorry, my oldest, who is now 21, was in kindergarten. But yeah, one of the big things for me was the parent teacher organization at Mills. I always jump into things, kind of just diving in, and I had never, I'd never volunteered at Mills before, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and be the president. And it wasn't just about, it was about bringing community together, because and bringing the parents together, because once kids go to high school, parents don't think that they need to be involved. They don't think that their kids want them around. But you can again, you can change things. And the important things for me in terms of funding was making sure, getting to know the teachers and how passionate they were about teaching our kids. It was important to say, hey, we need additional funding for them. And one of the big things for me personally, because it affected my oldest daughter, was making sure that our kids have access to mental health specialists, and also to just share with parents. I think during my time, we were able to get some parent discussions around mental health and how it is important. I mean, within the Asian community, it's even today, it's still a little taboo to think that your child might actually suffer from depression and they might need a therapist. And so that was one of my big things, is making sure parents understood it's okay to talk about it. We have these issues, and as a community, we need to come together and address them.
I understand that's such a really big culture shift, even on our campus. As a High School student, I've also seen the growth of being able to accept mental health and a lot of resources on our campus. So I thank you and the teachers and also the parents for being able to push that forward and actually, make a change, as you were saying, in terms of impacting, whether it be your daughter's experience or others on the campus. So I think that's definitely great work. And on top of that, even with younger kids, you've been involved with the board of directors of the Millbrae Education Foundation. So, speaking of like elementary and middle school students, what did you hope to impact in their education and the start of basically their journey into the education?
Well, I mean, I think, again, from a worldview, we're supposed to be one of the wealthiest nations in the world, but our public school systems aren't funded as well as they should be. So, I really believe in the teachers that we have within our public school systems, and equity is important. Is just whether it's through schools, whether it's social equity, and social equity in schools, I think is really, really important. And so that's one of the things, as an education foundation that fundraises for the districts, is that we try to fundraise, or raise funds for the schools, looking at inequities, what benefits all of the students. And I think that's why, my work there is feels really, really important and impactful, because we're helping our students, within the public school system, and making it a better environment and a better experience for them.
And with these roles as sort of being a decision maker, did you ever receive any pushback for anything you were, proposing? And as you were kind of talking about, even with the stigma of mental health within the Asian community, would you like to share maybe some of the experiences that you had to go through as someone who was making decisions and advocating for specific changes?
Yes, I mean, I think, just thinking of the Mills community, parents who think that, oh, I no longer need to be involved. It was a challenge to get people to say, hey, it's good to be involved in what my kids are doing. It's good to be involved in, as a part of the decision making. And it's really just, I think the important thing about any leadership position, and I don't really see myself as a leader. It's really, I would be serving the school, I'm serving the foundation, I'm serving the community. And when you look at it from that lens, and you listen to what people are telling you and what they're asking, then you can get people involved. And that for me is key. You need involvement when it comes to community advocacy, when it comes to schools. And so that was a big challenge, was just making sure that I wasn't telling people this is what we need, but asking, what do you think we need and how can we bring it to the schools? And just instead of, having these things where we're just talking about academics at Mills, it was important to say, hey, how can we get parents engaged, right? We can talk about these things, or we can have these events to bring them into the fold and make sure that they understood that their involvement is always, always important.
Yeah, it's great to see that you really have been able to work with teachers, parents, students, and other community members, and in bringing them together to create something good and positive. And you've continued to do that, in work related to social justice and anti-racist organizing. And so, as a steering committee member of the Millbrae Anti-Racist Coalition, what has been the most rewarding part of, as you were saying, serving the community and being able to create projects and events that really center around something that you're really passionate about, and that you want to see, certain changes in our community? So yeah, just share a little bit about some of the most rewarding parts of being able to volunteer and also be part of a community grassroots organization.
That's a tough question, because there isn't just one or two things. I mean, it's just a slew of things. This is something that I think I just kind of fell into because, Celeste, my middle daughter, was asked to help with the first rally after George Floyd's death. And I think um, it was an eye opener for me, because I think, I mentioned to you that anything that I do, I try to think, am I doing something that is beneficial for the community and something that my daughters can see as this is the right thing to do? As I've mentioned, as an Asian, we assimilate easily. And with multiracial kids, there were things in their lives that I hadn't paid attention to. And I saw as, well, that's how kids are, or, we'll get by it. So it was important for me to kind of understand I'm not helping this situation by not recognizing the things that they're going through and not speaking up about it. So, the Anti Racist Coalition was an opportunity to meet with like minded people from different backgrounds, because it has to be different backgrounds, and we can't always agree. The fact that it's grassroots, the fact that it's so organic, and we have young people, like you, Lillian, like my daughter, involved, and then people that are retired. I mean, everybody from from young high schoolers to college students to working people kind of coming together and wanting to make a better community. That is really that's really, really fulfilling. It's not to say that it doesn't have its challenges, because we're a very, very small steering committee with a lot of big ideas. So we have to take it down a level. But the fact that we're doing this and we're gaining traction and we're able to reach people outside of Millbrae, and even influence the city, that for me is really those are all just amazing work, and it's because of the people that we have and the dedication that everybody brings to it.
Yeah, jumping into it, did you ever imagine yourself to be in a position like this, or to even impact proclamations that the cities pass, or did it kind of just fall into place at a certain point, and you just continue to push for what you believed in within that group, and towards the community? Because I understand that you have been a community member in Millbrae for a long time now, and so knowing a lot of community members already, but also bringing in new things, new ideas to advocate for. How did you feel about, recently the Millbrae Anti-Racist Coalition also being recognized specifically for their work in diversity and equity? Yeah, just maybe share a little bit about your thoughts around that.
I think it's great to have been recognized. I don't really see myself as a big part of the group. I just see myself as a piece of it, and I appreciate that. And you know, I think what I think I bring to the table is the fact that I do work with other organizations that are more together, that have bylaws, that have things in place. And so, it's important for us to not necessarily agree on everything, but have a path, a direction. So, when we discuss things, again, very organically, and we come up with ideas, whether it's celebrating Women's History Month in a way that celebrates Millbrae women, or, thinking of events that bring our community together, it's really thinking of it with a lens that, I've done this work before. It's just a different way of doing things. And so it's just bringing that to the table. And I think everyone that we have on the steering committee brings something different. And it's really great, because we're not tied to, and it may not be the case forever, but right now we're not tied to a set of rules or someone else telling us, yes, you can do that, or no, you can't. So it's nice that way.
Yeah, from my experience, I've also enjoyed that piece, and I liked how you were phrasing it. Everyone brings something different to the table, and that's what makes it. It could be bumpy right along the road in terms of organizing, but I think that's probably the most beautiful piece of it. It's just really true to the passions, and whatever's motivating the community members is really just deep down wanting to better the community. So it's really genuine. And I may feel myself feel the same way about that. So as you were talking about your experience that you bring to the table, so you are also one of the chapter leads of the ACLU's North Peninsula chapter. So could you elaborate a little bit more on, as you were talking about before, experience and being able to work within a structure, and to bring impactful changes, but also in a way that's efficient, and a way that we can include, as many people's voices as possible in that process?
Yeah, so the ACLU, I think the first time that I heard about them was during the Muslim ban, when there were lawyers that were coming out to SFO, and they said, "Oh, I'm from the ACLU." So I started to do some research in the things that they did, and it's a national organization, and they really look at civil liberties from so many different angles, and they are. I think they're really kind of not necessarily the opposite, but they're on the other end of the spectrum from the Anti-Racist Coalition, where things are very, they have a set path. We have different projects that we're working on, but there's also a level of there's a level of autonomy that you have, and I think that you need with social equity and social justice work. Right now, we have two projects. One is kind of getting an advisory committee to oversee the work that the sheriff's department in San Mateo County is doing. So there's a lot of research involved there. There's a lot of reaching out to legislative officials. And then I'm running a project which I'm very proud of. It's looking at the school policies within our school districts. Are they able to change curriculum so that it's looking at it from a lens that has social equity in mind, where you're looking at not just one ethnic studies program, right, but looking at the overall curriculum, looking at math and science, and how can we look at that from the lens of a Latinx student or a Black student or an immigrant student who doesn't speak English that well. So those are the things that we're looking at and we're exploring. And so, again, it's really looking at the community as a whole. And those are really, I've been very mindful of. We could all volunteer for a whole bunch of different things, but I think my focus is, again, just looking at where can I affect change, social equity change. And that for me is the schools, through the Anti-Racist Coalition, and through the ACLU.
Yeah, I like the way how you frame that in terms of, I know there's so many different organizations and different projects out there in terms of picking and choosing. Obviously you don't have so much time because you are a full-time mom and you also have a day job. So it's really inspiring to hear how you really, I guess, prioritize things that I make help you create the change that you want to see, and is really genuine in terms of putting your heart into either just a few projects that you feel could impact the community as a whole. And so that's really great to hear, as someone, I think younger people oftentimes have a lot more resources and organizations to join. And so definitely the ARC and ACLU, I guess from your perspective as well, are two great ways to get involved in the community. So I think all of your work with community organizing has been super inspiring. So while we're on that topic of community organizing and just thinking about change in general, as this is AAPI Heritage Month, there is also, changes that need to be made within the API community. And so I know we've talked about a few and you've identified a few during this whole interview, but if you could identify one or two that, maybe you haven't mentioned or you feel like is something you see more now than ever, with especially a racial upheaval, kind of talk about, what specific changes it could be a broader API community, and how you would maybe suggest or recommend we go about making these changes.
I mean, I think there are two simple things that we can do as individuals, right? I don't think I think, again, if we start with each individual person and then go from there, then big ideas don't seem that big. One of them is just really taking the time to find the humility to say, I don't know enough and I need to know more. Just like all of us could do more learning in terms of Asian American history, right? As an Asian American, what can you do and what can you learn more of? Because I don't think anyone can say, I know everything about Asian Americans or Asian American history and our struggles in this country, because that will help us to become more sympathetic and empathetic to one another. So that's one thing. The second thing, as with multiracial kids, because I've seen this within my family, within my friend groups, is that the last couple of months, and I completely understand, we've been focusing on the hate against Asians and Asian Americans. However, I think we need to broaden that lens a little bit, right? And there are a pocket full of Asians that supported Black Lives Matter, but I don't know that all of us are there yet. And I think that's a part of the education piece, is that in order for us to uplift one another, we have to uplift all of the other underrepresented groups within the United States. It's not just, yes, we need to look out for each other, but looking out for each other means looking out for Asian Americans, looking out for our Black brothers and sisters, looking out for the Latinx community, looking out for people that are LGBTQ, everything. I mean, we have to look at it with a wider lens. Um, and I think people that I wouldn't say people, but I don't know that we're doing that enough as an API community.
I think to your point, also questioning as you're learning about privilege and what the stance of a model minority does in terms of racial wedges and things like that. And from your perspective, a little bit as you were talking about ethnic studies work, for your perspective with the curriculum that we have now, do you feel like we are doing enough in carrying that broad history of immigrants in this country and also different groups who have helped shape America?
I don't think we're doing enough. We always, money seems to be a hindrance for schools and school districts. We're taking the right steps, right? I mean, there's ethnic studies at Mills. However, we have teachers that are teaching it because they're passionate about it, because they already know this is the direction the schools need to take. But then there are other teachers that right now they aren't forced to change, right, how they think about history, and it's still the same curriculum that they want to teach. And I think until we say everyone has to understand the importance of this, right, looking at race within our education and rethinking the history books that we're reading, the literature that we're reading, and not make it just about, oh, well, we're going to learn more about Asian authors during Asian American Month, right? Or we're going to learn more about Black authors when it's Black History Month. It has to be ingrained in everyday learning. And it has to start young. It has to start at the kindergarten level, right? Because that's when kids start to form their thoughts and their ideas. So no, I don't think we're doing enough right now. People are starting to talk about it, but we need to bring it up to our leaders. We need to bring it up to the legislators. And there's an ethnic studies bill in California, the first state ever that's passed it. March of 2021. But it's a start. It's not. We're not at the finish line yet.
Right. I know you are still busy working on creating progress, and obviously, alongside many other community activists and leaders, teachers, students, and also administrators who are supporting these types of initiatives. So, it's really great to see in my district that things have started to begin. The process of integrating ethnic studies and looking at auditing, curriculum and infrastructure within the school. So. It's honestly really powerful to see how grassroots movements can bring out change. And I think it's been a big topic of today's conversation, and obviously you as a change maker. And so kind of in a more personal lens, as you were kind of, looking at being a community advocate while also being a mom, I know that you've moved around physically, many times, either through your childhood or to your adulthood, and plans were disrupted, and certainly things didn't always go the way that you wanted to. Do you have any regrets, and do you think people should embrace this uncertainty, and especially during this time of a pandemic? How do you think people should cope with just being able to let go and kind of reflect on their own passions deep down on deciding, where to head and what next steps to take?
Yeah, I think if we look at the, the last year as an example, whether it's things that happened within the political climate or, the pandemic itself, how folks had to readjust everything. It's that as human beings, we have to learn how to be less rigid. And I'm a prime example of someone who, growing up, I had plans, I had roadmaps, I had, 5-10 year plans. And I think the first time, when I didn't get to do my graduate studies right after I graduated from undergrad, it was a blow. And I don't think we should take those as blows. I think we should take that as this is an opportunity for me to just readjust and reshift. I mean, I did my graduate studies years later after my third daughter. So I don't, I look back on things and there isn't anything that I would do differently, because whatever happens, however you adjust to it, that makes you who you are. And if you don't like it, then you have the opportunity to just take a different path and change that.
Speaking like for high schoolers and also early graduates, and looking at your next chapter in life. I know a lot of people are sort of stuck in the same mindset of still being very rigid and narrow in their pathways, and I think your story obviously is a prime example of something beautiful turning out of not necessarily going to grad school when you wanted to go to grad school, and now being a mom and a community activist, and on top of having a day job. So I think your story is super inspiring, and you're full of wise words, and I think this interview will be able to help youth and also people who are looking to get involved more with community service, even at whatever age. I
I
think
hope
is
so.
definitely
Yeah.
something. You were talking about sort of the intergenerational impact that we see sometimes with community work, and obviously the perspectives that they bring. So lastly, of course, as I have been saying this entire time, you are an inspiration, but we're curious to hear who has influenced you in your life. And I know you probably have many, but if you could take the time to maybe highlight one inspiration in your life who you feel has been really impactful, and you want to take this time to honor them.
So I thought long and hard about that question, because there are so many inspirational Asians that we have today and in history. But when I think about the question, who's inspired me to do the work that I do, to love what I do, my day job it's not a job. I mean, I think you have to love what you do, whether it's because you're getting paid or because you're volunteering. And really, it's my daughters, Genevieve, Celeste, and Emma, who are my inspirations every single day, to really to they make me think about things. What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? How can I help change things so that the world is better for them? Because we say that you're the next generation, but our time, like I'm in my 40s. I don't think our time is up yet. Meaning that we can still affect change. We are still in that age group where we're leaders, where we're policy makers and policy changers. So I would say that the three of them are my inspiration in terms of the gold standard and wanting to change and make the world better.
Perfect. I love that so much. And I think you're right. Sometimes there's a lot of pressure also being put on young people to get out there and get their voices heard. And almost sometimes they feel alone, in the sense that Gen Z is kind of isolated from all the other groups. But I think that's what's really great, to have this intergenerational aspect of advocacy, like you being a mentor to either younger girls or your daughters, but I also love that you're able to learn from younger people as well, and your
Of
daughters.
course.
So learning never stops, and I think like you were saying, central to this theme is being able to learn and accept mistakes, and being able to just continue on changing the world. And so yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you today, Joy, about that, and thank you for sharing a little bit about your past and history, and also your wonderful work you've been doing in this community. So I want to thank you
Honored.
again.
I'm honored. Thank you, Lillian.